Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, December 7th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 74.3 degrees, with a low of 51.1, so expect a mild day with comfortable temperatures for getting out and about. Coming up, we'll examine the reasons behind the Supreme Court's potential decision to give presidents more power to remove leaders of independent agencies without restrictions. We'll also look into why California authorities are advising residents to steer clear of gathering wild mushrooms in the wild. Plus, coverage of other key stories making headlines today. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. This morning, the Supreme Court is poised to revisit a bedrock limit on presidential power. Ethan, walk us through what's at stake tomorrow.
The justices hear Trump versus Slaughter tomorrow, December 8th, just one day from today. At issue is whether the president can fire commissioners of independent agencies like the Federal Trade Commission without cause, overturning a 1935 precedent called Humphrey's Executor. According to ABC News, AP reporting, Chief Justice John Roberts has been steering the court toward broader presidential removal power for years, and this case could be the capstone. It's centered on former FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter's firing in March, shortly after President Trump's second inauguration.
So why does Humphrey's executor matter so much?
Humphrey's executor has been the foundation for keeping certain regulators independent from day-to-day White House control. It said Congress can protect leaders of multi-member commissions from being fired at will, because those bodies do quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial work. The Washington Post and legal scholars often describe it as part of the New Deal architecture for the modern regulatory state. If that gets knocked down, presidents could reshape agency leadership overnight for policy reasons.
What's the Trump administration's argument here?
Solicitor General D. John Sauer calls Humphrey's executor egregiously wrong, a phrase he uses in briefs summarized by Bloomberg Law and SCOTUS blog this week. He leans on the unitary executive theory, saying the Constitution vests all executive power in the president, so removal is essential to accountability. He echoes Justice Scalia's famous Morrison versus Olson dissent, arguing that antitrust enforcement at the FTC is purely executive, not quasi-judicial. In his view, if voters are to hold a president responsible, he has to be able to fire officials for any reason, even policy disagreements.
And how is Slaughter pushing back?
Slaughter argues the FTC's bipartisan, 5-member structure with staggered terms requires cause to prevent political whiplash. Her legal team, supported by briefs from legal historians, says the founding-era record is mixed, not a blank check for unlimited removal. CBS News highlighted a brief by UVA's Caleb Nelson, an originalist, who says Article 2 and early practices leave room for Congress to set for-cause limits using the necessary and proper clause. They warn that at-will removals would destabilize the independent alphabet soup of agencies that have existed since the 1930s.
What exactly happened with Slaughter's job earlier this year?
She was removed without cause in March 2025, just weeks after the inauguration. A district court initially ordered her reinstated, but the Supreme Court stayed that order in October, letting the firing stand while it takes the case. So she's out for now as the justices prepare to hear arguments. That stay signaled the court's willingness to reconsider Humphrey's executor.
How does this fit with the court's recent trends?
It's a straight line from cases like Sela Law in 2020 and Collins versus Yellen in 2021, where the court chipped away at for-cause protections for single directors. NPR notes that last year's Trump versus United States immunity decision described firing authority as conclusive and preclusive, underscoring judicial deference to presidential control over executive personnel. ABC's Mark Sherman reported that Roberts has been guiding this shift since about 2010, well before Trump's first term. Tomorrow's case could extend that logic from single director agencies to multi-member commissions.
Has the court hinted at how it might rule?
There are breadcrumbs. Justice Elena Kagan warned in a September dissent in a related dispute that the conservative bloc seems raring to overturn Humphrey's executor, and the court's emergency stays this year Letting several Trump removals stand while appeals proceed suggests skepticism about congressional limits on removal. Still, the justices flagged the Fed as differently structured, so they may carve out exceptions.
You mentioned the Federal Reserve. What's the status there?
The Fed is the outlier. When President Trump tried to remove Governor Lisa Cook in August over unsubstantiated mortgage allegations, the Supreme Court let her stay, pending a full hearing set for January 2026. SCOTUS blog explained last month that the court has repeatedly treated the central bank as uniquely structured to avoid market turmoil. So even if Humphrey's executor falls for the FTC, the Fed could remain insulated.
Outside the FTC, where else has the White House been testing this?
The Boston Globe, drawing on AP reporting, detailed removals at the National Labor Relations Board, the Merit Systems Protection Board, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. In July, 3 Democratic CPSC commissioners were ousted, briefly depriving the agency of a quorum and slowing enforcement until temporary appointees arrived. The Supreme Court allowed those removals to stand during litigation through emergency orders. It's a pattern of pushing the envelope and asking the justices to bless it.
Have any removals been blocked?
Yes, a couple. The D.C. Circuit put Shira Perlmutter, the Register of Copyrights, back in place for now, because that role sits under the Librarian of Congress rather than the President, raising separation of powers concerns rooted in the legislative branch. And as we discussed, the court kept Lisa Cook at the Fed for stability reasons, at least until arguments early next year. Those cases show the justices may differentiate among agencies.
What do supporters of the unitary executive say about the risks?
They argue the risk is overblown, and the current system undermines democratic accountability. The Federalist Society's commentators have long said removal limits create a headless fourth branch that Congress never had authority to build. Sauer presses that if an official is unfit or is resisting presidential policy, the remedy is swift removal, not years of litigation. He also urges courts to award back pay, not reinstatement, to avoid forcing the president to keep someone he no longer trusts.
And the critics?
They warn about politicized enforcement, whiplash, and potential chaos. Legal historians like Fordham's Jane Manners, as reported in the New York Times this week, argue that broad, at-will removal is historically novel and would have alarmed the founding generation. She said, quote, "I'm not holding my breath," end quote, about the conservative majority embracing those historical limits. Groups like the ACLU and the Brennan Center argue that Congress has long used for-cause terms to ensure expertise and continuity separate from partisan pressure.
Can you remind us what Humphrey's executor actually decided in 1935?
It was a unanimous New Deal-era decision during FDR's presidency. The court upheld Congress's ability to protect members of multi-member independent commissions from at-will removal, recognizing their hybrid functions in complex policy areas. That framing, quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial, justified insulating them to maintain impartiality and stability. Overturning it would upend nearly 90 years of administrative design.
How does the court's current lineup factor into this?
The conservative majority has grown more assertive about separation of powers, especially through a textualist and originalist lens. Roberts often looks for incremental steps, but the direction since Saylor Law has been clear removal limits are the exception, not the rule. NPR notes the immunity ruling last year turbocharged that posture, describing official acts authority in sweeping terms. If 5 or more see Humphrey's executor as an outlier, they'll likely pare it back or scrap it.
What remedies could the court order if it sides with Trump?
The administration wants a narrow remedy, no reinstatement, only back pay, so presidents aren't stuck with officials they don't want. Justice Neil Gorsuch suggested in a 2025 concurrence that equitable remedies shouldn't force return to office, which would intrude on executive discretion. If the court adopts that, Slaughter could win damages but not her seat. That would cement the practical power of removal, even when a firing violates older statutes.
What happens to other agencies if Humphrey's executor falls?
Expect ripple effects across places like the NLRB, MSPB, and CPSC, where for-cause language has long been standard. The Boston Globe pointed to recent disruptions at the CPSC as a preview, quorum gaps, delayed rulemaking, and paused enforcement. While some agencies might get temporary appointees, Continuity would depend on the White House's priorities. Environmental and financial regulators could see more turnover, though litigation will test each statute's text.
Are there any guardrails left if the court goes big?
Possibly, the justices could write a narrow opinion applying only to multi-member commissions performing core executive duties, or explicitly protect the Fed and similar entities. They might also leave room for modest procedural constraints short of for-cause limits. SCOTUS Blog's November analysis suggests the court is sensitive to market stability, which argues for selective carve-outs.
What are legal historians saying about the founding era?
They're split. Nelson, the UVA scholar, argues the record is equivocal and that the necessary and proper clause allows Congress to structure offices with limited removal. Jane Manners and colleagues say early statutes often used fixed terms and for-cause mechanisms, and that unfettered removal would have looked monarchical to anti-federalists. Their point, as CBS summarized, is that limits were seen as permissions about when removal could occur, not unconstitutional barriers.
How is the public supposed to track tomorrow's arguments?
The Supreme Court site will post the briefs, calendar, and eventually the transcript and audio. The argument is tomorrow, December 8th, so we'll likely see same-day or next-day transcripts, with audio following soon after. Outlets like NPR, ABC News, and SCOTUS Blog typically publish rapid analyses as soon as arguments conclude. Given the stakes, you'll see comprehensive coverage.
Does this define Trump's second-term agenda?
It's central to it. According to NPR, empowering the president to direct the administrative state has been a long-running conservative project, not just a Trump priority. But this court's trajectory and Trump's assertive use of removals have converged at precisely the right time for a sweeping ruling. If the opinion arrives this term, it will shape not only his legacy, but also future presidencies.
How quickly could the decision come?
Arguments are tomorrow, and a decision could arrive by late spring or June in the standard end-of-term window. Given the stays already in place, the court seems committed to resolving it this term. Watch for interim orders if any related emergencies arise at other agencies. But the big doctrinal move will likely wait for the final opinion.
Does Congress have any say if Humphrey's executor is overturned?
Congress could try to redesign agencies or tighten statutory duties, but if removal is treated as constitutionally vested in the president, for-cause language won't stick for executive officers. Lawmakers might shift some functions to the legislative or judicial branches where appropriate, or build more procedural constraints that don't cross constitutional lines. Any sweeping fix would invite new constitutional challenges. In the short term, oversight hearings and appropriations levers become the practical tools.
What's the business and market angle here?
Markets care most about the Fed, and for now, the court seems inclined to protect it to avoid volatility. For other sectors, antitrust, consumer products, labor policy swings could speed up, which means more regulatory uncertainty quarter to quarter. Bloomberg Law notes that companies may see faster deregulatory moves, but also faster reversals with future administrations. That churn is a cost many general counsels are bracing for.
How might the justices craft the opinion to avoid chaos?
They could announce a broad constitutional rule but stay the judgment or phase it in, allowing agencies to transition. They might also preserve pending actions to avoid undoing past enforcement wholesale. The court did something similar in prior administrative decisions to reduce disruption. Expect careful language around reliance interests, even if the bottom line favors presidential power.
What's your read on Roberts' role?
He's likely the architect of any narrow but decisive opinion. ABC's AP story describes his steady march since 2010 toward reaffirming presidential control while nodding to institutional stability. If he writes it, look for citations to Selah Law and Collins and a careful distinction for agencies like the Fed. That roadmap would continue the trend without touching off a market panic.
Any last thing we should watch for in the courtroom tomorrow?
Listen for probing about remedies and where to draw the line. Multi-member commissions versus single directors, pure enforcement versus adjudication, and the Fed carve-out. Also watch questions about historical practice, since both sides claim the founding era. NPR often highlights those exchanges as clues to the eventual opinion. The justices' focus could reveal whether they're aiming for a clean break with 1935 or a tailored cutback.
Ethan, this is complex, but you've made it clear. Thanks for the reporting.
Thanks, Grace. We'll track the arguments tomorrow and bring updates as soon as they land.
California health officials are sounding the alarm about wild mushrooms. Chloe, what's behind this urgent warning?
The state has seen a serious amatoxin poisoning outbreak tied to the death cap mushroom Amanita phalloides. Since mid-November, the California Poison Control System has tallied 21 cases, including one adult who died and several patients with severe liver damage. The California Department of Public Health, or CDPH, escalated its warning over the weekend, and coverage from CNN via the Associated Press and the Los Angeles Times underscored how quickly this can turn fatal.
How recent are these cases? And have there been any new ones today?
As of this morning, December 7th, officials say there haven't been additional fatalities or newly reported hospitalizations since late last week. The case count stood at 21 as of December 5th, according to CDPH and local health departments. NPR and AP reporting note that some patients, including children, needed intensive care, and at least one person is being evaluated for a liver transplant.
Do we know where the clusters are showing up?
Most of the attention is on Monterey County and the San Francisco Bay Area, but officials stress the risk is statewide because wet weather is fueling mushroom growth. SF Gate and CBS News reported that several Monterey residents got sick after eating mushrooms foraged in a local park. Fox News, citing the AP, emphasized that both residents and visitors are among those affected.
Why is this happening now?
California's rainy season runs October through March, and that's prime time for rapid mushroom growth. The death cap thrives near oaks and other hardwoods, which are widespread in much of the state. The LA Times points out the species isn't native to California, but it's entrenched here and is responsible for more mushroom-related deaths worldwide than any other.
How are people getting fooled by these mushrooms?
Death caps can look deceptively edible, greenish or yellowish cap, white gills, a mild taste that doesn't warn you off. AP News and ITV coverage explained that color is not a reliable guide, and crucial ID features like the vulva at the base and the ring on the stem are easy to miss unless you carefully dig around the mushroom. There's also a related killer, the destroying angel, which can resemble common edible species.
Can cooking or freezing make them safe?
No, amatoxins don't break down with boiling, frying, drying, or freezing. The Guardian and Contra Costa News, echoing CDPH advisories, warned that even half a cap can be lethal. That's part of why officials are urging people not to forage at all during this high-risk stretch.
What symptoms should people watch for?
The first wave tends to hit 6 to 24 hours after eating the mushroom: severe diarrhea, vomiting, cramping, and dehydration. Those can fade after a day or two, which gives a false sense of recovery. The real danger often comes 48 to 96 hours later, when liver failure can develop. CBS News and Click Orlando stressed how quickly untreated cases can deteriorate.
If someone suspects exposure, what should they do?
Seek emergency care immediately and call poison control at 1-800-222-1222 for real-time guidance. CDPH has been telling clinicians to loop in the poison center early so treatment can start quickly. Patch and Paso Robles Daily News highlighted those instructions in weekend advisories.
What treatments are doctors using?
First, aggressive fluids and often activated charcoal, which may be considered even many hours after ingestion. Specific antidotes include intravenous silibidinin, marketed as Legalon SIL, N-acetylcysteine, and sometimes penicillin G, as outlined by the Austin Clinical Toxicology Service in guidance from May 2025. SF Gate, citing NIH and CDC resources, noted that earlier administration is tied to better outcomes.
And if the liver's already failing?
Patients are transferred to transplant centers that can act fast. The Washington Post and the American Liver Foundation pointed to centers like Stanford Healthcare, UCSF, Cedars-Sinai and Keck Medicine of USC being on heightened alert through coordination with poison control. There isn't a public on-call roster, but the infrastructure is in place for urgent cases.
Have officials given any firm numbers by county beyond Monterey and the Bay Area?
Not yet. Public updates as of today don't offer a detailed county-by-county breakdown, which suggests they're still confirming exposures and sources. It's also worth noting that exposures can be accidental, children playing in yards or parks, so some cases come from outside organized foraging.
So the state's bottom line is, don't forage right now?
Exactly. CDPH Director and State Public Health Officer Dr. Erica Pan said, quote, "Death cap mushrooms contain potentially deadly toxins that can lead to liver failure. Because the death cap can easily be mistaken for edible safe mushrooms, we advise the public not to forage for wild mushrooms at all during this high-risk season." End quote. Monterey County's Dr. Edward Marino echoed that, urging only those with deep expertise to even consider eating foraged mushrooms.
Is there any pushback from the foraging community?
Even experienced mycologists say caution is wise this season. The Bay Area Mycological Society, as referenced in regional discussions, notes that lookalikes and variable conditions make identification tricky even for seasoned collectors. The broader point, as outlined in the LA Times and analyses shared on ResearchGate, is that targeted guidance can't realistically keep the general public safe right now.
How big is this problem in a typical year?
Poison control records show hundreds of mushroom poisonings annually in California, though most don't involve amatoxins. America's poison centers reported more than 4,500 exposures to unidentified mushrooms nationwide in 2023, about half of them kids who ate something outside. The CDC and prior CPCS data add that we see spikes when rains return, mirroring what's happening this season.
Have there been similar outbreaks before?
Yes. A 2016 California outbreak documented by the CDC involved multiple severe amatoxin cases, and the pattern is strikingly similar: wet weather, look-alike confusion, and delayed symptoms that trick people into waiting too long. Earlier this year, AP News also reported a case involving death caps sold by an unlicensed vendor, showing the risk isn't limited to hikers.
What about identification apps or field guides? Do those help?
They're not reliable enough to bet your liver on. CDPH and resources cited by independent.co.uk and WebMD caution that no app or single guide can guarantee safety, especially with young or damaged specimens that mask key features. That's why officials are sticking with the simplest advice: buy mushrooms from reputable stores.
For families with kids, what practical steps should they take?
Supervise little ones outdoors, especially in parks and yards after rain. If you see mushrooms, don't let kids touch or taste them, and remove them carefully if they're in play areas. And keep that poison control number handy, because early consultation can change outcomes.
Are there telltale traits to avoid, or does that risk false confidence?
That's the problem. There isn't a single safe visual rule. ITV and AP reporting emphasize that color, smell, and taste aren't reliable, and many dangerous species mimic popular edible ones. The death cap's sac-like base and ring can help experts, but those features can be hidden or missing in the field.
How fast do doctors need to act once a patient shows up?
Quickly, ideally within hours of suspected ingestion. Clinicians may start charcoal and antidotes even before definitive ID if the history fits, because waiting for lab confirmation can cost precious time. CNN's piece via the AP highlighted that the window between seeming recovery and liver failure is where people get into real trouble.
Are hospitals seeing strain from these cases?
Not system-wide strain, but ICU admissions and transplant evaluations are resource-intensive. The coordination with Stanford and UCSF in the Bay Area and major centers in Los Angeles is meant to streamline transfers. The Washington Post notes that this kind of regional readiness has improved since past outbreaks.
Do officials believe the worst is over?
It's too soon to say. Today's status shows no new reported hospitalizations, but the rainy season runs into March, and mushrooms will keep fruiting as storms roll through. CDPH and local health departments are continuing surveillance and public messaging.
How are communities responding on the ground?
Parks departments are posting warnings where clusters were reported, and some community groups are sharing CDPH infographics in multiple languages. Local outlets like SF Gate and CBS Bay Area have been updating case counts and the hotline number so people know where to turn. It's a broad effort to get ahead of the next wave of exposures.
What about people who think they ate an edible look-alike days ago and feel fine?
Don't assume you're in the clear. That deceptive quiet period is exactly what worries toxicologists, as noted by CBS News. If there's any chance you consumed a wild mushroom recently, reach out to poison control and a doctor to discuss monitoring.
Is there any role for home remedies?
No, and that's a dangerous detour. The NIH and CDC resources cited in SF Gate's reporting are unequivocal. This requires medical care, with specific antidotes and hospital support. Delay worsens liver damage and raises the odds of needing a transplant.
Does the risk extend beyond parks and forests?
Yes, death caps can pop up in urban greenbelts, schoolyards, and street medians near oaks. The Houston Chronicle and Breitbart both noted that California's ecology, especially damp areas around live oaks, creates hotspots even in city neighborhoods.
Are restaurants at risk if foragers sell to them?
Legitimate restaurants rely on licensed distributors and have strict sourcing rules. The January case AP reported involved an unlicensed vendor, which is illegal and dangerous. CDPH's advice is to stick to commercial channels and never buy foraged mushrooms from informal sellers.
What's the guidance for experienced foragers who feel confident?
Even experts are urged to hit pause this season. The Bay Area Mycological Society acknowledges that environmental variability can blur features, and fatigue or poor lighting can lead to errors. As the LA Times put it, death caps are unforgiving. One mistake can be catastrophic.
Are certain age groups more vulnerable?
Children are at higher risk simply because accidental exposures are common, and they have less physiologic reserve. Older adults and those with underlying liver disease can also fare worse. America's Poison Center's data show roughly half of mushroom exposures involve kids, underscoring the need for vigilance.
If someone has a specimen they ate, should they bring it to the hospital?
Yes, if it's safe to do so, sealed in a bag or container. It can help with identification, though treatment shouldn't wait for confirmation. Poison control can also connect clinicians with mycologists when needed.
How are officials keeping the public updated?
CDPH is posting advisories online and pushing messages through county partners. The Associated Press, CNN, and the LA Times have been amplifying key points, and local stations are reiterating the hotline. As of today, there's no new county breakdown, but updates are expected as investigations continue.
For people who want to help, what's useful?
Share verified guidance from CDPH and poison control, not mushroom ID tips. Make sure neighbors know the hotline number and the symptoms that require immediate care. And if you spot mushrooms where kids play, notify the property owner or local park staff.
Bottom line, Chloe?
Don't forage wild mushrooms this season, period. Buy from reputable stores, supervise kids outdoors, and call poison control the moment you suspect an exposure. As Dr. Pan warned, the death caps toxins are lethal, and the margin for error is zero.
Chloe, thanks for the clear guidance and the update. We'll post the poison control number and the CDPH link on our site and keep watching developments through the week. Here are some other headlines. In Benin, a pre-dawn broadcast brought a primetime problem. Mutinous soldiers appeared on state TV announcing a military committee for refoundation, claiming President Patrice Talon had been removed, all institutions suspended, and borders shut. The spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Pascal Tigre, blamed governance woes. Gunfire was reported near the presidential palace in Cotonou. But by mid-morning, The government said the putsch was kaput. Interior Minister Alassane Sidou declared loyalists had foiled the mutiny and that the president is safe. The attempted reset threatens to hard reboot one of West Africa's steadier democracies, with a presidential vote not due until April 2026, and adds to a region already rattled by coups. A literal jolt shook the north as a magnitude 7.0 earthquake rattled a remote stretch along the Alaska-Yukon border on Saturday, December 6. USGS pegged the epicenter about 56 miles northeast of Yakutat and 155 miles west of Whitehorse, at a shallow 6 miles deep. Shaking was felt as far as Juneau, but there were no injuries, no structural damage, and good news for coastal nerves, no tsunami threat. Seismologists say aftershocks will keep the ground chattering for days, a reminder that the plate boundary keeps life on a fault line. Tensions took flight over the East China Sea. Japan and Australia issued a joint call for restraint after Tokyo said a Chinese J-15 fighter locked its fire control radar onto Japanese F-15s near Okinawa. Defense ministers Shinjiro Koizumi and Richard Marles condemned the extremely regrettable move. Beijing pushed back, alleging Japanese harassment during scheduled carrier drills. A radar lock is the geopolitical equivalent of a finger on the trigger, dangerously close to making waves where none are needed. The dust-up comes a month after Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi floated possible military support in a Taiwan conflict and coincides with deepening Japan-Australia defense coordination, a quasi-alliance that's moving from paper to practice. In Hong Kong, voters headed to the polls for a legislative council election under the Patriots-only framework, even as the city mourns a catastrophic blaze in Tai Po's Wang Fuk Court on November 26 that killed at least 159 people. Turnout hovered near 20% by mid-afternoon, threatening to undercut 2021's record low of 30.2%. Chief Executive John Lee urged ballots to bolster reform and rebuilding. Police said they've arrested individuals accused of urging a boycott. The tragedy has ignited urgent debate over flammable scaffolding materials and the oversight of aging renovations. Safety now the ballot line everyone is reading. And in a show of global solidarity, supporters of Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado rallied in more than 80 cities, from Madrid to Lima, Buenos Aires to Utrecht, celebrating her Nobel Peace Prize ahead of next week's Oslo ceremony. Demonstrators waved portraits and chanted, "Free Venezuela," casting the prize as a passport for democratic renewal. Machado, in hiding since early 2025, says she intends to attend on December 10, a high-stakes exit that could turn applause into pressure for President Nicolas Maduro, as Washington sharpens its focus on Caracas and beyond this week. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.